Did you know that Red Bull arrives in Azerbaijan after a crushing victory at Monza, but with the championship practically lost and the pressure on Verstappen? What seemed like a historic rebirth could become a mirage if Baku once again exposes the RB21's weaknesses. Before continuing, let me know your opinion in the comments. Do you think Red Bull can repeat its Monza dominance in Baku? The big question is, has Red Bull found its way back to the top, or are we facing its last real chance in 2025? In this video, we'll review how Red Bull is approaching the 2025 Azerbaijan Grand Prix with all the technical details, Verstappen's condition, and the challenges the team faces after its resurgence at Monza. Red Bull arrives at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix with a renewed sense of accomplishment that seemed impossible just a few weeks ago. Max Verstappen's triumph at Monza, with an overwhelming 19-second lead over McLaren, was not just another victory for the Dutchman, but a true blow of authority that restored the Milton Keynes team's confidence. For much of the season, the RB21 had shown obvious flaws, balance issues, a very narrow operating window, and the constant feeling that McLaren was setting the pace in the championship. However, Monza became the stage that rekindled hope, proving that under the right conditions, Red Bull can still be a serious contender. The most interesting thing about this resurgence is that it wasn't a fluke, but the result of months of technical work and strategic adjustments that finally bore fruit. Technical director Pierre Watch acknowledged that the latest updates exceeded expectations and that, for the first time in a long time, the car responded as projected in simulations. The victory in Italy showed Verstappen at ease, with a car that seemed to adapt to every low-load corner and every acceleration on the straight, precisely in the type of conditions in which he had struggled most this season. Furthermore, Verstappen's confidence has been a determining factor in this resurgence. The driver insisted on maintaining a specific setup that initially didn't fully convince the team, but which ended up being the key to achieving pole position and the subsequent victory. This ability to impose his opinion not only reflects Max's sporting maturity, but also the growing synergy between him and the engineers. The driver-team relationship, which had shown signs of tension in previous months, now seems strengthened by a result that validates the Dutchman's instincts. But the context also has two sides. Although the victory at Monza lifted spirits and restored hope, it doesn't change the reality of the championship. Red Bull remains fourth in the constructors' standings, far behind McLaren, and Verstappen occupies third place in the drivers' standings, a considerable disadvantage over Oscar Piastri. This situation creates an intriguing contrast, a team celebrating an epic triumph, but knowing the title is practically out of reach. Therefore, the true value of this resurgence lies not in points, but in morale and technical credibility heading into the season finale. The big question is whether this rebirth can be sustained in Baku, a street circuit that combines endless straights with demanding, technical sections. Here, the RB21 must demonstrate that what it saw in Italy wasn't a one-off flash in the pan, but rather the beginning of a trend that could change the course of the remainder of the year. Given this scenario, what happens in Azerbaijan will be crucial in measuring Red Bull's true strength. It's not just about repeating the success of Monza, but also about confirming that the team has found a performance foundation that can be transferred to different scenarios and conditions. That will be the first major test to validate whether this rebirth is real or a momentary mirage. Red Bull knows that its present and immediate future depend almost exclusively on the figure of Max Verstappen. The team has gone from dominating commandingly for several seasons to finding itself in a situation where the driver's confidence is as important as technical improvements. The victory at Monza served as a bomb, but also as a reminder that, without a committed Verstappen convinced of the project, all the work can unravel in a matter of months. The Milton Keynes management understands that every positive result must be transformed into a solid argument to retain their champion. The team's official position has been clear. Red Bull is not willing to lose its star driver. Technical director Pierre Watch has insisted that the project is heading in the right direction, and that the latest updates to the RB21 prove that the car's technical foundation remains competitive. For his part, Laurent Mekies emphasized that the plan is to maximize every opportunity in 2025, even with the Constructors' Championship lost, because what's really at stake is credibility ahead of the major regulatory leap in 2026. These messages are not accidental. They seek to convey to Verstappen that there is a long-term plan in which he is the central focus. Verstappen, for his part, has shown a change of tone in recent weeks. At Monza, he was heard on the radio with a mixture of relief and enthusiasm, thanking the team for their efforts and congratulating the engineers on a perfect weekend. However, beyond the celebrations, Max was cautious in his subsequent statements. He acknowledged that the direction of development is positive, but cautioned that the car remains highly dependent on the track. In other words, he appreciates the progress, but isn't getting carried away by euphoria. This stance reveals that, although he is satisfied with the work done, he remains on guard because he knows that a stumble on a less favorable track could return the RB21 to the problems that plagued it for much of the season. In this context, the relationship between Verstappen and the technical team has taken on unprecedented relevance. The Dutchman's decision to stick with a configuration at Monza against the engineers' initial suggestions became a symbol of how his intuition can make all the difference. The fact that this choice resulted in pole position and victory reinforced not only Max's self-confidence, but also the team's willingness to listen more closely to its driver. This change in internal dynamics demonstrates that Red Bull is learning to give Verstappen more space, aware that his direct involvement is key to maximizing performance. At the same time, Red Bull faces an image challenge. The perception that Verstappen could leave the team weighs on collective morale. Every rumor about Ferrari or Mercedes resonates inside the garage as a threat that goes beyond the sporting aspect. Therefore, positive results are not only necessary to score points, but also to send a strong message. Red Bull remains the place where Verstappen can expand his legacy. Without that narrative, rivals will have an increasingly strong argument to try to convince him to leave. Ultimately, Red Bull's position is that of a team struggling to prove that the present can still be successful and that the future will be even more promising. And Verstappen's position is that of a driver who, while appreciative of the progress, keeps the pressure on his engineers to ensure that the advances aren't a flash in the pan. They both need each other, and both know that the decisions made in the coming months could define not only the end of the season, but the entire direction of the project. Red Bull's immediate future is focused on the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and what happens on its streets will be decisive in measuring the true extent of the progress made at Monza. Baku is a circuit that demands the best of both worlds: maximum speed on endless straights and absolute control in tight, technical corners. Red Bull arrives confident that the recently introduced aerodynamic improvements will allow them to harness their power on the straights, but at the same time they know that the struggle in low-speed zones remains a costly weakness. This duality makes the race a test that goes far beyond the points at stake. Pierre Waugh himself has made it clear that the immediate objective is not to pursue a championship miracle, but rather to confirm that the RB21 is capable of maintaining stable performance in different scenarios. This strategic vision responds to the need to gain time and credibility, not only to keep Verstappen motivated, but also to help the team regain the confidence lost during the most difficult months of the season. Every practice session and every race session in Baku will be closely scrutinized because their consistency will determine whether the Monza revival becomes a trend and not just a one-off flash in the pan. For Max Verstappen, the expectation is also clear. He needs a car that guarantees he can fight at the front regardless of the circuit. If he can repeat the solidity of Monza in Azerbaijan, he will send a strong message to the paddock that he still has a competitive machine in his hands. Laurent Mekies, for his part, acknowledged that car development has slowed as much of the resources are allocated to the 2026 project. However, he also emphasized that strategic adjustments can still be made each weekend to maximize what they already have. This pragmatic approach aims to demonstrate that, even without major developments, Red Bull is still capable of competing with the best when it finds the right setup. In this way, the focus is less on new components and more on the precision with which data is interpreted and decisions made in real time during the Baku weekend. On a championship level, expectations are limited but not irrelevant. Verstappen still occupies third place in the driver's standings, and although the gap to Oscar Piastri seems insurmountable, each individual victory represents a morale boost and a way to remind the other teams that Red Bull is still in the fight. The same is true in the Constructors' Championship. The title is lost, but racking up podiums and wins is essential to maintaining the narrative of a team that doesn't give up. This perception is key to attracting talent, convincing sponsors, and above all, keeping its star driver convinced that the project still has a future. In short, Red Bull arrives in Baku at a crossroads that could define the course of its season. The victory at Monza restored hope and gave a breath of fresh air to a team that seemed doomed to irrelevance in the face of McLaren and Ferrari. However, that victory doesn't erase the doubts that have been building for months or remove the pressure on Verstappen. The Dutchman has made it clear that he trusts the technical direction, but also that performance remains fragile and dependent on the track. This duality, between renewed confidence and extreme caution, is what keeps the intrigue alive about his future. Let me know your opinion in the comments. Do you think Verstappen and Red Bull will truly re-emerge, or was it just an illusion at Monza? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel.